welcome to Business Talk Sister Gawk. I'm Becca.
And I'm Ruthie.
And today's episode is book promotion. And with us we have Matthew W. Quinn. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you. You're welcome. I'm always glad to help out.
Yeah, so can you tell us, what is your business?
Okay. By day, I'm a high school history teacher, but by night and afternoons and weekends, I'm a science fiction fantasy writer. And most of my stuff, but not all of it, is independently published.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. So why did you start doing it?
Well, I've always wanted to be a writer. I remember when I was a very little kid, my grandmother, she was a teacher for a different school system, had a very old electric typewriter that I remember typing stories on. Like, a lot of it was just stuff I made up, like one involving dinosaurs and diving helmets. I was probably about 4 or 5. And over the years, I've written a lot of short fiction. I didn't sell any until about 2006. So now I have written books, and some of them I've sold to small presses, like my novella Little People, Big Guns. And there's one called The Thing in the Woods. I sold to a small press and then got the rights back and republished myself, and then independently published a sequel. So that's The Thing in the Woods and the Atlanta Incursion. And now there's a independent fantasy series I have called Battle for the Wastelands. The first book is Battle for the Wastelands. There's a companion novella called Son of Grendel. And I'm working on the second full novel called Serpent Sword that I'm hoping to have done and published by the end of the year. We'll see about that.
Wow. Nice. Okay. So I have so many questions, but the first one, you had said that you had just kind of mentioned kind of your progression, and then you said you started selling in 2006. So what was that transition
That was
there?
Okay. So if you want to be a writer, there are places you can find markets to sell. And one of the places I found is a website called Ralan.com, RALAN.com. There's a webzine called Chimera Serials, like the Greek mythology monster Chimera. And so I sold them a short story I wrote called I Am the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a creature from Canadian Native American mythology. It's like the spirit of sort of like cannibalism. And the Bigfoot crowd think it might be a more aggressive kind of Bigfoot.
Okay.
That like attacks and eats people. And so I wrote a story from the perspective of the Wendigo.
That's a little morbid.
Yeah, so I sold that for $20.
What did you say? Spirit of cannibalism in Canada?
Yeah, it's Native American mythology. I think it's a taboo against eating people when the winter comes and the food runs out. Is it will turn into a monster that is always starving and ever hungry, can only eat people.
Okay.
Wow.
Object lesson right there. Don't do that.
The things you learn from Bigfoot books in the 3rd grade.
I'm just shocked that you kept that from 3rd grade until college to write that.
It's been ruminating. He had time to let it percolate.
Yes, okay. That was my first sale, was for a money order for $20 from a webzine.
Okay, so now you're an author, you're doing a bunch of stuff. How do you do it right now?
Most of my money I actually make from conventions. So there's a website called the Southern Fandom Resource Alliance that has a calendar of conventions that are in the greater South, which is basically DC to Florida to Texas to Oklahoma. And Atlanta being a convention city, there's a lot that are close by. So I check the calendar for conventions. Atlanta ones are better because I don't have to drive. Sorry, I do have to drive. I don't have to spend money on a hotel overnight. This past summer, I went to this little convention, a bunch of people who wanted to go to Liberty Con, but that was shut down due to the pandemic. So they called it confinement. And so I spent one night at the hotel there, and I did make a very narrow profit, I think, on that. But if I didn't have to stay overnight in Dalton, I probably made much more.
So how do you decide if a convention is going to be worth it for you? What goes into your decision-making process for profitability?
Okay, so I don't have to stay overnight somewhere else because books are rather low margin. So $90 for an overnight hotel stay, that is a great big bite out of profit. Like, for example, my last big convention was a toy and comic show in Augusta, Labor Day weekend. And my total profit was around $125. But I had some relatives in Augusta I was staying with. So 2 nights a hotel, say $100 each, that means I've lost $75.
Yeah.
Avoiding staying overnight. If I can find someone to split the table with, like both times I attended Days of the Dead, I went with other authors. The first time was with T.S. Dan, who also lives in Atlanta, and Nathan McCullough, who lives further out of town, but was willing to come in and split a table with me. So that was a very big factor in being able to make profit both times.
Okay. So those are kind of your best practices for convention choosing. And then how do you prepare to attend a convention?
Well, one way to attend a convention that's real nice is if you can be a guest, because you don't have to pay for anything. Like I attended a NACRACon this past February and I was a guest, so I was able to attend for free as long as I presented a certain number of panels, which I did. I was also a guest at Hypericon, so the problem with Hypericon is more that the 2 nights hotel stay than the fee.
How do you get to be a guest?
Well, I can play up that my knowledge and experience on certain things, like independent writing and publishing. Let's see, Hypericon, I presented on like genre blending. So there's, have you read the book or watched TV show The Strain?
No, I have not.
It was on FX. It was about vampires. And it's like a combination medical thriller, because the vampirism is a virus that's carried by worms, that converts the human body into a mechanism for spreading the worms that carry the virus. So it is very scientifically fascinating, also incredibly gross. So that's genre blending. It's horror. It's a medical thriller, like kind of like Outbreak, and then eventually gets full on post-apocalyptic later in the series. So I talked a good bit about The Strain.
In your presentation, you talked about the book as a guest.
Yeah. So I knew I could talk about The Strain, even though I didn't write it. It's Guillermo del Toro who wrote it. And let's see, my own work, Battle for the Wastelands, I call it Dark Tower meets a Game of Thrones. It's like a fantasy because it's not our world. It's a Western because that's the aesthetics of the world. It's post-apocalyptic.
Hold on. What is post-apocalyptic defined as?
After something goes very wrong, so like a nuclear war, like an asteroid impact.
Okay. I didn't know that was a genre.
Yeah, it's a genre. Like right now in the indie world, there's a whole lot of after the electromagnetic pulse fiction. Like all the computers and power go out because of electromagnetic pulse, like a high altitude nuclear detonation. So there are a lot of like indie action stories about what happens after the EMP. Like it's oddly specific for an apocalypse. So basically a way to get on panels is have an area of expertise. So with the genre blending panel at Hypericon, I was able to talk up The Strain, which I didn't write, and Battle for the Wastelands, which I did, or The X-Files, which blends, like they have the overall alien invasion plot line, sci-fi. You have like magic, fantasy, horror, just the overall aesthetic. It's also kind of like a crime drama. So The X-Files is an example of genre blending. And I have a master's degree in world history. So like a steampunk, alternate history, world building type panel, that's something I can play up. So if I can find a convention where I can be a guest, I can pitch myself as a subject matter expert in something.
Okay.
And
Wow.
that way
So
I can potentially attend the event for free.
So it's kind of like you get to just talk about what you love and then people listen. So that's cool.
Oh yeah, that's also why being a teacher can be so much fun.
It's a captive audience. Okay.
Yeah, I tell the kids that, then I start laughing maniacally.
I'm sure they love that. So you kind of mentioned about like the strains and using that as an example of genre blending. But how valuable is it to read other authors and watch like these similar genres of things that you already are kind of into, and how has that helped you kind of develop as an author?
Well, you can learn from other authors quite a bit. Like I'm a former member of my critique group is an Atlanta author named James R. Tuck, and he taught me a way to write without using the word said or even speech tags at all. Like instead of saying, you moron, she said angrily, you moron, she shouted,
Or she glared, "You moron!" exclamation point. Tighten, 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 tighten. So that's a technique I learned from another writer. And you learn technique to improve your techniques from better writers in general. Like Stephen King, Dean Koontz, these are people who are very good.
Huh. So, okay, when we kind of heard you say that you're a history teacher and stuff, what has that had an impact, or are other books that are classics, have they impacted your writing or your ability to story tell in different ways?
Oh, quite a bit. Like when I got my master's at Georgia State, I took a class where I read a book called Killing for Coal. It's about this series of strikes and fights between striking miners and the Colorado State Militia in the early 20th century. And that combined with something like steampunk is the steampunk fiction a lot of times is just parasols and airships and all very nice and Jane Austen-y. But if you realize the time period and culture which steampunk is based, there's an age of class warfare, strikes, and labor violence and whatnot. So when I was doing Battle for the Wastelands, I made labor and strikes a very big part of it in a way that a lot of steampunk does not touch on, because of what I learned in getting my master's degree.
It's almost like being true to the actual genre instead of what people have made it to be.
Yeah, so knowing history, is very helpful for world building, because many fantasy worlds are based on real history. So like when J.R. Tolkien was talking about the decline of Gondor, he compared it to Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire.
How did you know that?
For a present, a friend of mine gave me the letters of J.R. Tolkien, so he's writing about his world to somebody. So he's writing about the decline of Gondor. He compared it to the end of the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of Rome, that just weakened and weakened and weakened. Eventually, the Ottoman Turks put it out of its misery. And like most fantasy land is fake medieval Europe, which is based on Tolkien, because everyone's been ripping them off for decades now. But then some fantasy is different. So there's one fantasy series which is based on kind of a conglomeration of China during the Qin and Han dynasties in Southeast Asia. I think the series is called the Dandelion Dynasty or something like that.
So how does, when you're getting ready to do like an event or start promoting your books more, how does social media either help you as a writer, or does it have some negatives as well?
Well, social media, I have a MailChimp email newsletter. And so I, whenever I'm at a convention, I have my notebook and I have people sign up their names and emails. So then I add them to my MailChimp newsletter. I have about 400 people on my mailing list.
Wow.
And so when I have an event that's coming, I announce that I'm going to be there and what I'm going to be bringing.
And that's how you promote your new books and material too?
Yeah, like I attended an indie writers festival at the end of the summer. And so I sent out I was coming, and someone who had signed up on my mailing list when I was there last said, "I'm going to come so I can get the sequel to the book I bought from you the first time."
So how have you utilized the different like social media platforms or email and everything to keep your readers engaged and with the different things that you're doing?
Okay, well, you want to emphasize what you can give people, not what you can get from them. So with MailChimp, my newsletter, I many times will send them links to this film podcast I'm on called Myopia Movies, where like they can listen to the podcasts, or they can read my movie reviews I've written based on notes I've taken while watching the movies for the podcast. Like myopia is you watch childhood movies, see if they're still good. So some ones you've done recently are like one that came out today was Daredevil, which that would have been like when I was in high school or college, which I never saw it, so it wasn't an episode. But an episode we did do was like Land Before Time and Secret of the first one, the only one that's good.
There was like 8 or something.
Yeah, Don Bluth was only involved in the first one. That's the only good one,
Mm.
as far as I know. I haven't really seen the other ones. They don't have good reputations.
So-
And so I like when I watch a movie for the podcast, I take notes and I turn the notes into a movie review, which I have on my blog, and I can repackage for my newsletter to save work. Work smarter, not harder. And it's giving my newsletter readers something. And a recent newsletter I put out how I would have done the 2004 King Arthur movie, which that was a recent episode of Myopia Movies. So reuse content. And what can you give your reader?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned this a little earlier about like learning from a writers group and stuff. Has that been beneficial for you to have a writers group, or is it not important in the process?
Oh, it is very beneficial because for starters, I have to commit to having a chapter or chapters for each meeting, whether I have the chapter written or not. So I tend to dawdle and spend way too much time on social media, which that's the downside of social media, is it's a time suck. So I commit to having chapters so I can run the whole book through the critique group, which incidentally means a draft that gets finally published is much, much better than the first one. Because there's a writer I know named Delilah S. Dawson who she said the first draft is word vomit. Just get it written. Worry about it being good later. So I ran chapter 8 of Serpent Sword, the second Battle for the Wastelands book, through my writing group. And they had so many suggestions how to improve it that it's going to need major rewrites. If I just wrote it by myself and then self-published it, it would be much worse. Because that's what the thing with self-publishing is, no one is telling you no, or no one is telling you what you did wrong to improve unless you seek it out, like through a critique group.
That's like really good advice or really good thoughts on that though, because I mean, a lot of people like publish books because they're like, oh, this is good enough and I don't really care if anyone else likes it. But I don't necessarily know if that's a way to be profitable long term.
Yeah, like there's a lot of bad self-published books out there, like people who just finished the book and self-published it without really editing it. Or also the writing group is good for networking. Like thanks to James Tuck, I know Jason Sizemore, who's the head of Apex Publications. It's a small press, and he has like did a professional level critique of draft 4 or 5, which that's what usually is when it gets to him. And then I revise it heavily based on his instructions. Then he formats it and then I upload it to Amazon. And he got me to hook up with his cover designer. So Battle for the Wastelands and Son of Grendel and also the Atlanta Incursion, the sequel to Thing in the Woods, they both look good in terms of packaging, which is very important because a lot of self-published books, like you have the same artist and like 5 or 6 books might use the exact same cover, just with different titles.
That would be confusing. So you have been utilizing these different groups for networking and for learning and for improving things. What are some other ways that you prepare to launch a new book?
Well, once upon a time, I was a regular participant in something called PitMad. It's like Twitter pitch parties where you would post your book and hashtag it PitMad, and people who are participating would retweet it, and agents would like it, and then you would send like the first chapters or whatever to an agent. And so I saved the Twitter handles for the people who helped me, like they retweeted it or talked about how great it was. So when the book was finally published, I tweeted the buy links to those people originally, which some of them just had quit Twitter. Some of them I tweet at them. I think they blocked me because like, who's this? Why are they spamming me? Like they've forgotten. But some people remembered and they retweeted. So I get pretty big spikes early on from the wave of people I'm tweeting at.
Is that a technique that you just picked up on, or did somebody tell you about that?
I think I figured that out on my own because I realized I had all those people who had retweeted it, my pitches, because they liked the concept. So I thought, ready-made market here.
Yeah, that's really cool. So
and then they might review.
How do you stay motivated with all this? It sounds like of all the things that you've been talking about, it all sounds like a decent amount of work. I mean, you introed with this is what I do in my evenings and on my weekends. And so like, sounds like a lot of work. How do you stay motivated?
Well, going to conventions is fun. You get to talk to people and make quite a bit of money and go to new places. And I like doing those. It's like, and plus it's a you can write off so many expenses, like almost like a vacation that's tax deductible. And what else? And writing group can be fun, but I mean, a lot of times it's just a matter of discipline. Sometimes you just have to sit down and make yourself do it. Like Brian Keene, he's a horror writer. He blurbed Little People, Big Guns, and he was part of the horror show with Brian Keene podcast. We decided to step away from that to focus more on his writing. And he talks about writing 8 hours a day, which since I have a day job, that's not possible. So I need to make sure I use the time I do have efficiently, while at the same time also having a social life and exercising and doing all those things to stay healthy and functional.
So what tools have helped you to become a better writer or save time? Do you have any kind of resources that you've been like, these are really great, I would recommend these? And do any of those also apply to promotion?
Well, in order to time manage your time, Google Calendar, like if you have Google Mail and Google this and Google that, like my father encouraged me to use Google Calendar, and that's a good way to keep organized. When everything has to be done.
Mm-hmm. So you do that for when you're going to have to, like, you give yourself deadlines for each piece.
Yes, set deadlines. Tell me when I need to do different things, when I need to follow up and bother people. Like one promotional technique I've learned is BookTube, like YouTubers who talk about books. So I just had the YouTube channel Books of Blood just put out a review of Little People, Big Guns. So I had in Google Calendar, it's been how long since you submitted to him, make sure you follow up.
Mm-hmm.
For promotional tools, I have my calendar, like on Saturday evening, I need to set up Amazon ads because now I got the rights back to Thing in the Woods and self-publish it, I can advertise Thing in the Woods using Amazon's AMS system, and the sequel comes out. So Amazon ads, so if someone clicks and buys the first one, then they might go on to the second one because Amazon ads think are only profitable if you have more than one book.
Interesting. How did you figure that out?
Learning from other writers. Like I listen to a lot of writing podcasts.
Do you have any recommendations on writing podcasts that people should check out?
Okay, there's the Sell More Book Show, the Six Figure Author. Those are two big ones. Like the Sell More Book Show is one that recommended get your book into libraries. Ooh. So I donated some copies to the Gwinnett Library in Gwinnett County, Georgia, and you can see how many times your book's been checked out. Like there are like 6 holds on 2 copies. So when Gwinnett County Library is willing to host events again, I can maybe have like a book talk at the library and bring books to sell.
Mm-hmm.
Because my first book signing event at the library, I made a PowerPoint, and one of my church friends showed up. She was the one person who came, and she bought a copy from me, I guess to be nice.
Good to have moral support, right?
Yeah, no, she was probably excited to read it. She has a friend who's an author, and that's really cool.
There's probably some of that too. It's not like it wasn't a total pity sale, but that's kind of how it felt. But the Gwinnett, because Gwinnett has so many people who checked out the books that when I talked to the library people, when things calmed down and they put out in their newsletter, there was a decent base load of people who have read the book in a way that the first library book talk probably did not have. Mm-hmm. Because I got the book cataloged, and then probably not that long afterward, I arranged with the library to have a book signing, and they put out in their newsletter, but probably very few people had read the book, if any. But the Gwinnett Library, now they've had so many people who have read the book now that this might work. Same with Decatur. They asked, like the Decatur Library in DeKalb County, they said they could tell me how many times my book has been checked out. So Thing in the Woods, as of like last year or the year before, had been checked out 3 times. Like they track that now.
That's
and you can just call them up and say, "Hey, can you tell me how many times my book has been checked out?"
Yeah.
Huh.
Wow. That is slick.
So that tip I got from the Sell More Book Show led to me having an idea of where I can have book events. COVID short-circuited that, but where I can have them later. And also, because I had my book in the Cobb County Library, I managed to swing that into a newspaper interview with someone I knew from UGA who worked for the Marietta Daily Journal, which in turn, when I had a book signing, people who had read the article came.
Wow. So how did you know who your audience was? Like, I'm just thinking about this, like you have such a specific group of readers that are really into that.
Well, I did create a Facebook fan page to run Facebook ads, and Facebook, you could set an audience for your ads, like people who are interested in ebooks and horror literature, and are engaged shoppers. So that narrows the audience down. So you advertise via Facebook to the most interested audience. Of course, Facebook's most recent ad update, you can't do that anymore. Now it's ebooks or horror fiction or engaged shoppers, which is like 100 million people, which is useless to me. Luckily, my old audiences from before the update still exist, so I can advertise to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I can use those old audiences, and Facebook said they're working on that because they said that I'm not the only author to complain to them about that. Facebook ads, none of my Facebook ads have made a profit. The closest I've come is making $43 in royalties on $50 spend, but they do move copies, or at least they did. My most recent ads haven't, and I suspect that's because that they've advertised to everyone already.
Okay.
So my next plan is to go back to Amazon ads.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to transition into the Sister Gawk portion of our episode, and Matthew's going to tell us some fun stories about conventions.
I'm really excited about this because we started talking about how people start dressing up for conventions, and this is something I've never done for
She's always wanted to do.
Okay, yes. Clarification. I have always wanted to, and no one will do it with me.
Well, then go by yourself.
Yeah, that's really my problem, is I'm not brave enough to do that. So what is it like? Tell us about like the things you've seen and like your experience with that.
Well, I've seen some very elaborate and impressive costumes, but I don't want to spend a lot of money on that. Like, I once read an interview with a guy who had made a very high, like, movie level quality Anakin Skywalker costume, and he'd spent so much money on it that was a contributing factor to his getting divorced.
Yikes.
Whoa.
Okay, so there are some definite cons of dressing up for conventions.
And then I did an article on Dragon Con for a newspaper I used to work at, and I met a guy who had bought the Necromonger armor from the Chronicles of Riddick movie, like the actual armor the characters wore, and he's wearing it to conventions. And that was so cool, but again, that's also probably expensive.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
So the one time I cosplayed at a convention myself, I dressed as Matthew McConaughey's version of Randall Flagg from the Idris Elba Dark Tower movie from a couple of years ago. So it's basically I was wearing my black suit and a black undershirt and my black dress shoes and black socks. So it's stuff I already owned. So I didn't have to spend any money.
So the grand total was $0, and here's this necromancer guy who's probably like $100,000 in the hole. So
I don't think it was that bad because I don't think Chronicles of Riddick made that much money.
Fair enough.
So they
Maybe
were probably
that's how they
unloading.
made money.
So it was probably not that expensive to get the props, which is sad because Chronicles of Riddick is actually pretty cool.
Okay, so like movies do that on a regular basis though? They just like get rid of their props and sell them afterwards? Is that common?
I have no earthly idea because they made a third Riddick movie because there was Pitch Black, Chronicles of Riddick, and then there's a movie called Riddick. So they probably had to save some of the costumes.
Or they really shot themselves in the foot.
Like, oh shoot, we're gonna do another one of these. We should have kept those.
We gotta, like on Daddy Daycare when he's like, "There's stuff. It's not for sale." Yeah. So they probably had to do that and take everything back.
So one year I went to Dragon Con Atlanta dressed as evil Matthew McConaughey from the Dark Tower, and I was going to go to a Dark Tower panel. Then I decided to skip it and do something else. It turns out there was a guy dressed as Idris Elba's gunslinger at the panel. And I ran into him the next day. He still had his costume on. I was wearing my normal clothes. So kind of missed a big photo op there.
What a letdown. Did you run home and then switch outfits again?
Dragon Con has like 50 or 60 to 80,000 people.
So there was no running.
And I'd have to get on the MARTA train, go back up to the nearest MARTA station, walk or take a lift back to my apartment, change, and then come back to the convention and find the guy again in a convention of 80,000 people. That's not going to happen.
Okay, well, now you all know that if you're going to go to a convention, always have your stuff with you at all times. Pack up your backpack with everything you need and never leave the convention.
Or just always dress up so you don't miss the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Matthew, so much for being here with us this week. It was so fun to pick your brain and learn from you and just get to enjoy your sense of humor. Yeah, so if you liked our episode, then go ahead and subscribe to us on Apple Podcast and give us a review. And we will see you again next week.